Good morning and welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways, Coyote in the Highlands. I've made a few videos recently about urban planning and stuff. We've talked about the idea that higher density housing actually has problems, ecological problems, problems with waste levels and density of humanity, neurological and psychological problems. And we have an expert class of urban designers who have all of these fancy answers that don't really seem to take into account the basic fundamentals. And I'm not trying to present myself as an expert. That would be hubris. I don't think we really have experts. I think we have people who have ideas to experiment with, but that we haven't figured out cities. We've only been doing it for 10,000 years, and just to speak in terms of how long we've been terraforming the planet, how long we've been deliberately affecting the environment, like through fire and stuff. We've been doing that for over 1 million years at this point. So, cities and agriculture is less than 1% of that, okay? You can say about 1% of that, or slightly less than 1% of that. So we don't really know a whole lot, we don't really have this locked down or anything. My ideas, growing up, looking at it, I've done some research. I've lived in various places. I've lived in a lot of places, cities and rural areas, multiple countries, in fact. I tend to have a feeling that the idea of garden cities, strip greenbelt cities, like the interstate cities, ring cities, that these are answers that we can work with neurologically, psychologically, physically, in terms of physical health, and in terms of dealing with necessary inputs and outputs, resource inputs and waste or resource outputs of humanity. I think that these are workable systems. I don't think that the hyperdense urban systems that we've been building are, I think suburbs actually have a better thing going than we want to admit. They just need a couple of little tweaks, like better common spaces, a little bit less of the square footage per person demand indoors, because that's actually not very healthy for us regardless. Our societies are moving away from common space ideas, and with good reason, because we don't have a good way to manage common spaces, make them safe and healthful for people, low anxiety, actually make them positive psychologically. So that's a big problem to fix. But what I'm really trying to get at is that people tend to be very prescriptive and proscriptive in this area. And there are other options. There's other ways to build. There's other ways to do. And we have enough space, enough people, enough general wealth to try different systems. When you get into the space, you end up with a lot of people who are extremely controlling, extremely authoritarian in their desires. You delve into the space of these urbanists, and they want to force everyone to have bicycles, because e-bikes and e-cars, electric cars, are wrong and bad and evil, and everyone needs to minimize and have exactly this same utopian static amount of input, output, health level, effort. It's really horrible. And it's very, very authoritarian. The outlook is very authoritarian. Maybe that's another part of the social democrat, because most of these people seem to self-describe as social democrats, and I've always had to try to figure out what that really means. Democrat is supposed to mean majority will, but apparently it means their will for what they perceive as majority benefit, or majority moral behavior. It's not even benefit, it's just what they want people to do somehow. It's really crazy. So, anyway, back to the actual urban planning part. I would like to see more of these smaller villages. I'd like to see more make use of the fact that we do have really good low-impact infrastructure logistics systems. That we do understand gray water at this point, that we do understand how to disperse and distribute human populations, manufacturing, everything, so that it doesn't overwhelm one area. And all this stuff ties into things like national security. National security seems like an outdated concept, especially in the Enlightenment community. But the truth is that not everyone's enlightened, and nations will go to war with nations, and people will come out and try to control you and destroy your life if you don't have some sort of system in place. And that's a fun game for the people who want to play it. So that's really cool. But distributing out, dispersing your infrastructures, your logistics, your livingry. I love that term, livingry. Your manufacturing, your food production, making that all dispersed and distributed actually gives you a huge amount of resilience, because you can't attack something that is just spread out like that. You can't damage something that is just spread out like that. The new methods of warfare are trying, social warfare, social mimetic warfare, social media, cultural programming, trying to make societies unsuccessful or untenable through, basically media attacks is what it boils down to. Control of the thoughts and attitudes of the population. That's all a really big deal. And the globalists and the Chinese, and I'm not trying to pick on the Chinese, but they're there and they're doing it. The globalists and Chinese seem to be fighting for who can do the most damage in that area, which is another reason why we actually need that kind of dispersal and distributism, is that it gives you local incentives to have local communities where you can have the respect of other people, give respect to other people, and have that community and in-person sharing, and get away from those programs. That's a really big deal too. So this is, it's been a very short series, but it's just a little thing about how do you manage the populations, the inputs, the outputs, some of the things to look at, some of the things to examine that people tend to not want to examine, like just dead skin and air quality and humidity. Bodies create humidity in enclosed spaces. These things are things that are not generally accepted as what you should be thinking about, what you should design around. The closest we come is HVAC, which is just a horrible way of trying to manage air quality and cleanliness, environmental cleanliness for indoor populations without letting them outdoors. It's a horrible. If that's the closest we've got, that's pretty bad. And plenty of permaculturists and people like me living in a yurt, we understand other ways to design around it, but we're not anywhere near mainstream. Even I hate to say it, but even the Earthship people are way too enclosed. I understand the environmental controls. I'm in the desert. I understand wanting to be cooled off and stuff. Right now I have shade, but we're getting closer and closer to monsoon season, so there's a little bit of humidity, and it feels really muggy once you're adapted. When you've got 30% humidity, it just feels sticky, and people in Missouri are going to laugh at me. People in Florida are going to laugh at me, because 30% humidity, but it feels sticky. So, I get the desire for some environmental controls and some more airflow and stuff. Just shade doesn't seem adequate at times, but there's a lot to it. Cooling towers and vents and stuff, it all works, but there's a lot to the idea of being more outdoors, which is just a side rant anyway. Urban planning doesn't tend to take into account the humans, and that seems to be a really big problem. And I just wanted to point that out and talk about other ways of looking at the problem, other things to think about, and why I don't really see the hyper-urbanists, the hyper-urban density crowd, the everyone has a bicycle but nowhere to park it because every building is 50 stories of little cubicle-sized apartments. I don't really see that, I don't see the dynamic or the super benefit to that, and I just wanted to express it. I think that we can urbanize with more of a village atmosphere and much more green, natural, open space. And I highly encourage you to find green, open, natural space in your living environment. Try to shift yourself so that that's what you have. And that might mean different jobs, different career paths, different sets of opportunities, but it's healthy for you. And you should try to live a healthy life more than a programmed, successful life, I think. Stay sideways.